Houses don't have memories. That's what we tell ourselves to sleep at night. But some houses, they don't just remember. They hunger. Welcome to 112, Ocean Avenue. The most famous haunted house in the world. But long before Hollywood made it a curse, a true horror story was written here, in blood. On November 13, 1974, at exactly 3:15 a.m., this suburban dream became a graveyard. An entire family of 6 was murdered in cold blood while they slept. No struggle. No neighbors heard a sound. Only one member survived, the killer. Mugshot of Ronald "Butch" DeFeo Jr., expressionless. Ronald DeFeo Jr. later confessed, and his motive was a chilling whisper from the dark. But the murders were only the first chapter. 1 year later, a new family moved in, completely unaware that the house was waiting for them. Autumn, 1975. Meets the Lutzes, George, a sharp, successful businessman, Kathy, and their 3 small children. After house hunting for what felt like an eternity, they found a bargain too good to be true. 112, Ocean Avenue. It was the perfect 6-bedroom colonial, with a pool and a large boathouse, listed for a bargain price of just $80,000. But it had a murderous past. The realtor was brutally honest. 1 year prior, Ronald DeFeo Jr. had murdered his entire family on these grounds. George and Kathy were rational people. They didn't believe in residual energy or ghosts. Houses don't have memories, they thought. They bought the house and never once considered it to be uninhabitable. It was, quite simply, their dream home. They fell in love with it. Similarly to the Hollywood portrayal, they felt that whatever had happened to other people. But the moment the Lutz family stepped across the threshold, something in the house shifted. The warm, inviting home began to feel cold, damp, and alien. George Lutz was an active, clean-cut businessman. But immediately after moving in, he underwent a drastic, sudden personality shift. He became sluggardly, chilled, and unusually cranky. The man they knew was vanishing, replaced by someone unkempt, a man who was always freezing, obsessed with stacking the fireplace with massive logs. He was withdrawing from his family. But the most disturbing change was in his sleep. George started waking up, at exactly 3:15 a.m. every night. The exact moment the DeFeo murders had taken place. Let's go back to that fateful autumn night. November 13, 1974. Ronald DeFeo Jr. picked up a rifle and went systematically from room to room, murdering his parents and 4 siblings one by one, as they slept. The grisly details are what truly haunt this property. Within an estimated 15-minute time span, 6 bodies were found, all face down on their beds, positioned that way. To add to the strangeness, the rifle reportedly had no silencer. Yet, aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing even a single gunshot that night. The only thing they did find peculiar was the family dog's reaction. The dog was tied up outside and was barking fiercely. None of the neighbors reported anything odd or concerning during the time the murders took place. The nightmare didn't begin with a phantom in the hallway or a scream in the middle of the night. It began with a quiet, suffocating rot that seemed to seep straight out of the floorboards. Before the Lutz family even finished moving their heavy wooden furniture into 112, Ocean Avenue, Kathy Lutz felt a strange desire to have the house spiritually cleansed. Given the violent bloodbath that had occurred in those bedrooms just 12 months prior, it felt like a sensible precaution. They reached out to a local Catholic priest, a close friend of the family known in official accounts as Father Ralph Mancuso. On a cold afternoon, while the Lutz family was still unpacking boxes downstairs, the priest walked into the house alone with a bottle of holy water. He made his way up the stairs toward the 2nd floor, intention to bless every room. He walked into the sewing room, the very room where 2 of the young DeFeo children had been found face down on their mattresses, shot through the back with a high-powered rifle. The moment Father Mancuso raised his hand to sprinkle the holy water, the air inside the room instantly plummeted to freezing cold. It wasn't just a chill, it felt like stepping into a meat locker. Before he could speak a single prayer, an unnatural, burning heat slapped against his face. And then, out of the empty corners of the room, a heavy, guttural, masculine voice echoed with terrifying force. It didn't whisper. It boomed, "Get out." Father Mancuso froze in sheer horror. The atmosphere turned suffocatingly heavy, as if the room itself was rejecting his presence. He staggered backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt an intense, feverish heat spread across his skin, followed by a sudden, violent wave of nausea. Terrified for his life, the priest rushed down the stairs, leaving the house without telling George and Kathy the full extent of what he had experienced. He didn't want to panic the young family on their very first day. Loud, aggressive blisters began breaking out across the priest's hands and face later that evening. In the coming weeks, his health deteriorated rapidly. High fevers, uncontrollable shivering, and sudden, inexplicable bleeding plagued his body. Whenever he attempted to pick up a phone to warn the Lutz family about what was waiting in that house, the line would instantly crackle, fill with static, and go dead. The house had cut off their only line of protection. Unaware of the warning their priest had received, George and Kathy tried to settle into their dream home. But within 48 hours, the atmosphere inside 112 Ocean Avenue began to warp their reality. The cold was the first constant tormentor. No matter how high George cranked the thermostat, or how many dry oak logs he burned in the fireplace, the cold remained. It wasn't an environmental chill, it was localized, moving through the halls like invisible clouds of ice. 1 second a room would feel normal, and the next, your breath would turn into thick white clouds of mist. Then came the personality shift. George Lutz was a disciplined, ambitious man who took pride in running his survey business. But within a week of living in the house, he abandoned his job entirely. He stopped shaving. He stopped bathing regularly. He would sit for hours in front of the fireplace, staring into the flickering embers with dull, hollow eyes, shivering under a heavy wool blanket. Every single night, without fail, George's eyes would snap open in the pitch black of his bedroom. He didn't need to look at his alarm clock anymore. He already knew what the glowing red numbers read, 3:15 a.m. It was the exact window of time when Ronald DeFeo Jr. had walked from bed to bed with his Marlin rifle. At 3:15 a.m. ever. George would lay frozen in bed, listening to the agonizing sounds echoing through the walls. He heard the heavy, rhythmic creaking of wooden floorboards in the living room below, footsteps walking in wide, deliberate circles. One night, around 3:20 a.m., George heard what sounded like a massive marching band practicing in the front parlor. He heard the distinct blare of brass horns, the booming rhythm of drums, and the rustle of a large crowd moving around. Gripping a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, George crept down the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. He flicked on the light switch. The room was dead silent. There was no band. There were no musicians. But what he saw made his stomach drop. The heavy living room carpet, which had been laid flat under massive couches, had been completely rolled up and pushed against the far wall. The heavy furniture had been dragged into the corners, leaving a massive, open space in the middle of the floor, as if someone had deliberately cleared the room to host a dance. Things rapidly escalated from bizarre to revolting. Kathy Lutz began noticing a thick, foul green slime oozing out from the keyholes of the interior doors. It dripped down the white painted wood, staining the carpets. No matter how aggressively she scrubbed the doors with bleach, the thick, gelatinous fluid would slowly seep back out hours later. Then came the infestation. In the dead of winter, with snow covering the front lawn and temperatures hovering below freezing, an army of black flies invaded the second-story sewing room. Hundreds of massive, buzzing flies covered the window panes, swarming so thickly that they blocked out the pale winter sunlight. Kathy killed them by the dozens with swatters, sweeping dead piles of insects off the floorboards, only for hundreds more to materialize out of nowhere the very next morning. Psychologically, the entity was targeting their youngest child, 5-year-old Missy. Missy began spending all her time isolated in her bedroom, talking animatedly to the empty air. When Kathy gently asked her daughter who she was talking to, the little girl smiled innocently and said she was playing with her new best friend. She called him Jody. Missy described Jody not as an imaginary child or a friendly ghost, but as a massive, dark pig with glowing, fiery red eyes that could transform its size at will. She said Jody told her that he lived in the house, and that he was never, ever going to leave. One freezing night, George was walking across the snow-covered backyard after checking on the boathouse. He happened to look up at the second-story window of Missy's bedroom. There, standing in the glass, was his 5-year-old daughter. And standing right behind her shoulder, towering over her small frame, were two glowing, blood-red eyes embedded in the dark, silhouette face of a monstrous swine. George gasped, dropping his flashlight into the snow, and charged up the stairs 2 at a time. He burst into Missy's room, slamming the door open, ready to tear whatever was inside apart with his bare hands. Missy was fast asleep in her bed, tucked tightly under her blankets. The window was locked from the inside. But outside on the window ledge, stamped deep into the fresh white snow, were massive cloven hoofprints. The terror was no longer psychological. It was physical, and it was draining the life out of the family. Kathy Lutz began experiencing horrifying physical transformations. George would look across the kitchen table at his young, vibrant wife, only to freeze in sheer horror. Before his eyes, Kathy's skin would wrinkle, her cheeks would sink, and her flesh would turn a pale, sickly gray, aging her into the appearance of a 90-year-old woman in a matter of seconds. Kathy also reported feeling invisible, icy hands wrapping around her waist from behind, lifting her off the ground, or pressing down on her chest while she slept until she couldn't draw breath. One afternoon, while investigating a strange odor coming from the basement, George moved a stack of old wooden shelves away from the wall. Hidden behind the shelves was a small, concealed door that wasn't marked on any of the official architectural blueprints of the house. George pried the door open. Inside was a tiny, claustrophobic closet painted entirely in a sickening, blood-red color. The room was barely large enough for 2 people to sit intimately close. The air inside smelled overpowering, a foul, nauseating stench of rotten meat and stagnant river water. When George tried to drag their German shepherd down into the basement to inspect the room, the brave guard dog whimpered, locked its legs, and backed away in absolute terror, refusing to go anywhere near the red doorway. By the 4th week, the entity inside 112 Ocean Avenue was done playing games. It wanted the Lutz family broken, terrified, or dead. By mid-January 1976, 28 days after moving into 112 Ocean Avenue, the house had turned into an active war zone. The torment was no longer subtle, and it was no longer happening only in the dark hours of 3:15 a.m. It was constant, violent, and relentless. The final, terrifying escalation began on a freezing night when the weather outside matched the nightmare inside. A massive winter storm raged across Long Island, driving icy wind and rain against the glass of the quarter-moon windows. George and Kathy sat downstairs, exhausted, jumpy, and hollowed out from weeks of sleep deprivation. They knew they couldn't endure much more. The tension in the air was so thick it felt difficult to breathe. Then, the house made its final move. It started with a low, vibrating hum that echoed from deep within the foundation, shaking the floorboards beneath their feet. Heavy wooden doors throughout the entire house began slamming shut all at once, bang, 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 reverberating through the halls like gunshots. George sprinted up the stairs toward the children's bedrooms. As he reached the second-floor hallway, the temperature dropped so rapidly that frost instantly formed on the inside of the walls. Inside the kids' bedrooms, total chaos had broken out. Heavy wooden beds were lifting off the hardwood floor, hovering inches in the air, and slamming back down with violent force. The children were screaming in utter terror, huddled under their blankets as invisible forces shook their bed frames. Kathy rushed into the master bedroom, only to be hit with a horrifying scene. The massive furniture in the room was moving on its own, sliding across the floor as if dragged by unseen hands. When Kathy tried to reach for her children, an invisible, crushing weight pinned her down onto her bed. She couldn't move her arms. She couldn't raise her head. She looked up at the ceiling and felt an icy, unseen presence hovering directly over her body. Suddenly, her body began levitating off the mattress. She rose inches into the air, completely paralyzed, floating above the bed while George struggled against the suffocating pressure in the hallway to reach her. Downstairs, the walls themselves seemed to bleed. The thick, foul, green slime was no longer just oozing from keyholes, it was trickling down the wallpaper in long, sickening streaks. The air reeked of stagnant swamp water and decaying meat. Out in the hallway, a dark, shadowy figure began to materialize, a tall, hooded mass of absolute blackness that blocked out the dim light. It didn't have a face, but its presence radiated a pure, concentrated malice that made both George and Kathy drop to their knees in agony. George looked at his terrified, crying family. The house wasn't just haunting them anymore, it was trying to consume them. It was trying to drive him into the exact same violent madness that had overtaken Ronald DeFeo Jr. just 14 months earlier. George made the decision right then and there. They weren't going to fight it. They weren't going to try to clean the house or pray it away. They had to run. Without packing their clothes, without grabbing their personal belongings, and leaving behind thousands of dollars worth of furniture, food, and family heirlooms, the Lutz family fled out the front door into the pouring storm. They piled into their vehicle, backed out of the driveway of 112 Ocean Avenue, and drove away. They never stepped foot inside that house ever again. They had lived at the address for exactly 28 days. The sudden flight of the Lutz family sparked a media circus that would forever change pop culture. But as soon as the story hit the newspapers, the burning question arose: was 112 Ocean Avenue truly a portal to hell, or was it the most elaborate, lucrative hoax in modern history? Shortly after the Lutzes fled, world-renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren stepped into the picture. They brought a team of reporters and news cameras into the empty house to conduct a full-scale investigation. Lorraine Warren, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant, claimed the moment she stepped inside, she was overwhelmed by a sense of pure evil. She reported feeling a demonic presence so powerful that it physically nauseated her. During an infamous overnight vigil in the house, infrared cameras captured one of the most debated photographs in paranormal history, the image of a young boy with glowing eyes peeking out from a bedroom doorway. Investigators claimed it was the ghost of John DeFeo, one of the young boys murdered in 1974. Skeptics, however, argued it was simply a flash reflection on one of the investigation team members. Then came the legal battles and the skepticism. Skeptics and journalists began digging into the financial state of George Lutz prior to the move. Reports emerged showing that George was facing severe financial strain with his land surveying business. The most damaging blow to the story came when Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney, William Weber, made a shocking public admission. Weber revealed that he, George, and Kathy had sat down over several bottles of wine and come up with key details of the haunting story. Weber claimed the story was a sensationalized creation designed to leverage DeFeo's legal appeals and generate massive book and movie deals for the struggling Lutz family. Furthermore, every family that lived in 112 Ocean Avenue after the Lutzes reported absolutely nothing unusual. Subsequent owners modified the house, replaced the iconic quarter-moon windows to deter tourists, and changed the official street address to erase the home's morbid notoriety. They lived peaceful, undisturbed lives within those same 6 bedrooms, claiming the only real nightmare was the endless stream of trespassers and tourists staring at their front lawn. Yet, despite the claims of a hoax, George and Kathy Lutz maintained until their dying days that the core terror they experienced was 100% real. They admitted that certain details in the books and movies were exaggerated by publishers and filmmakers, but they swore under polygraph tests that the invisible footsteps, the terrifying cold spots, the levitation, and the overwhelming atmosphere of evil were genuine. Whether 112 Ocean Avenue was occupied by ancient demonic forces, or was simply the site of a tragic human atrocity exploited for fame and fortune, one truth remains undisturbed. On November 13, 1974, 6 real people lost their lives in those bedrooms. And no matter how many times you paint the walls or change the address, the shadow of what happened at Amityville will never truly wash away.